أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين إلى يوم الدين. We start in the name of Allah, the most gracious, most merciful, and we bear witness there is no deity worthy worship except Allah, praise and glory be to Him, and that Muhammad is the seal of messenger. He was sent as a mercy to all mankind. May peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, his family, his companions, and those who follow this path until the day of judgment. I greet you with the greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all, dear brothers, dear sisters. This is the A2Z show, which has been absent for some time now. And we are happy to have our guest, the brother Asad Zaman, with us today. Your host is Dr. Abdul Aziz. Of course, you can always send us on Radio Hajj commentary, any questions as well, and on the video as well, which is available on the program of Radio Hajj. And this is www.radiohajj.online, where the program is actually put there in the 24 hours, 7 days a week, the program as well. There's a lot to cover, of course, but as usual, we start with the local community news, and the best to start with is the Friday pulpit or the Friday sermon, as Brother Asad Zaman goes around in mosques to deliver his sermon on Friday. So therefore, we ask him, inshallah, to give us a brief about the summary about the topic of today on Friday and which mosque he went to. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam, Brother Abdul Aziz, and our audience, wherever you are, whoever you are.
Thank you.
Yes, I was in one of the local mosques there in Ashton, not too far. It's about 12 miles from my house. And it actually was the first time I went there. It was quite an interesting experience. I talked about, well, there are two things, and I told them this. Look, there are two very pressing things to talk about. There's tons of things we can talk about, two pressing things. One is, of course, the ongoing slaughter and genocide that's happening in Gaza, in Palestine. And also, well, it's that time of the year. We're approaching Christmas in schools. Especially in primary schools, they're talking a lot about Jesus being God, Son of God, the nativity play, baby Jesus. And obviously they're singing a lot of hymns. And obviously this is going to confuse a lot of children about what the position of, who is Jesus. Now, of course, the advantage we Muslims have is that we also love, number one, believe that Jesus Christ existed, that he was a prophet of Allah, and that we have a lot of love and respect for him. Is mentioned in the Quran in a lot more detail than the life of the Prophet Muhammad actually. So the Quran has a lot to say about him. The Prophet Muhammad had a lot to say about him. And so it's important for our parents to have a very clear understanding of where we as Muslims stand, and then they can educate their children regarding the status of Isa al-Islam and also his life. And the fact that he's not just important to Christians, but he's also important to Muslims as well. So let's be quite brief, because the Quran, and this is what my khutbah was about. It was about combining really the life of Jesus, Isa al-Islam, and of course his mother, with what's happening in Gaza, and then later on we can talk about a little bit more history of Palestine. So what does the Quran say about Isa al-Islam? So again, there's a huge amount of detail. It will take me over an hour, 1.5 hours to just talk about that. So I'm going to be brief because we want to talk about the history of Palestine. And of course, he was born in Palestine, Isa al-Islam. So that's really quite interesting in itself. So the Quran tells us about Hannah, or Hanna in Arabic, who was the mother of Maryam alayhi salam, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. And she prays to Allah that he gives her a son. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to answer her prayer, but decided to give her a daughter.
Mhm.
Now she pledged to Allah that if you give me a son, I will, give me a child. She prayed for a child,
Yes.
but in her heart, she was hoping for, she meant a son, but she didn't ask for a son. Anyway, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had different plans for her, and he gave her a daughter, and she felt, oh dear. You don't give daughters to the mosque to bring up. You give sons to the mosque to bring up. But she felt she had to honor her pledge, and she told the mosque, Masjid al-Aqsa, where Zakaria alayhi salam, the great prophet of Allah himself, he was the teacher and the imam. And so when the word got out that Maryam alayhi salam, this Hannah rather, the wife of Imran, who was a highly respected Bani Israel leader, they are giving their son to the, or daughter rather, to the temple or the masjid to bring up. So all the guys, all the people who were in the masjid staying there, they all wanted to look after and bring up Maryam alayhi salam. Zakaria alayhi salam drew the straw. It's like drawing straws. You put maybe 10 straws which are the same size, and then one straw that is a different size, and then you keep picking them up, and then the one who picks the long one wins. And something like that happened with Zakaria alayhi salam, and he actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him to win and him to bring up Maryam alayhi salam, and therefore he got the privilege and the honor of bringing up Maryam alayhi salam, baby Maryam. So he built himself, according to Ibn Kathir, a private room, small room in Masjid al-Aqsa, in which was especially for Maryam alayhi salam. As she grew up, maybe she was about 2 or 3 years old, and Ibrahim alayhi salam or Zakaria alayhi salam comes into the room and notices food, in particular like fruits, which were completely out of season, according to Ibn Kathir. And he would ask her, Maryam, where did this totally out of season fruit come from? Remember, there was no import-export like we have today, where we can get, it might be out of season for Britain, but it's in for some other part of the world, where there's summer rather than winter as it is here. And so obviously it was a total surprise to him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about this in the Quran when he says, كلما دخل عليها زكريا المحراب وجد عندها رزقا. That whenever Zakaria alayhi salam would enter the mihrab, this private room, he would notice this rizq, this food, and he would ask her, I mean, Maryam, where did this come from? She would reply, هذا من عند الله. This is from Allah. Immediately he realized that this is the angels of Allah who are sending this food. Allah has deputized them to bring this food to Maryam. And he realized that, of course, he's a prophet of Allah, so he has a close connection with the angels. He's very familiar with them. So he realizes this is a very, very special young lady he's got here, that the angels of Allah themselves are bringing food to her. Of course, on orders from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. So anyway, he brings her up, he's educating her, and of course, he's getting knowledge directly from Allah, and he's educating her with that purest of knowledge. When she gets to about maybe mid-teens, Jibreel alayhi salam appears to her in her room in the form of a handsome young man. And of course, her immediate reaction is, get away from me, stay away from me. I'm a pure, chaste woman. And if you fear Allah, stay away from me. Don't touch me. To which the angel replies, Jibreel Islam replies, you have nothing to fear from me, Maryam. I am simply a messenger from Allah who's come here to give you some great news that you are going to have a son whose name will be Isa bin Maryam, Jesus, son of Mary. And he will be illustrious in this world and the Akhirah. And also he will speak to humanity in his cradle as a baby and also as an adult. So all of this, she was informed. Now you can just imagine the reaction of Maryam, alayhi salam, which was predictably, baby, what baby? No man has ever touched me. How can I possibly have a baby? And I'm not some loose woman who goes around like Bahia, I think, like a prostitute who's going to be sleeping around with men. I'm going to have a baby. He says, no, don't worry about that. How you're going to have a baby, I know you're pure. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala determines something, lahu kun fayakun, be and it is. So don't worry about the mechanism. Don't worry about the how. Just prepare yourself. And Jibreel alayhi salam leaves. Soon after, of course, she's pregnant, and the word starts to get out that Maryam, this young lady who's been brought up in the mosque, is pregnant. And everybody knows she's not married. And she's from a highly, highly respectable family. And the word gets around, and you can just imagine the gossip, what they're thinking, that someone clearly has made her pregnant. Someone, she's committed haram. And of course, the words get to her as well, and she knows she's done nothing wrong. She leaves the temple, she leaves the mosque, and starts to head basically towards her village, where her parents and others are. And in fact, the Quran tells us that on her way, she's hungry. She's obviously in the desert. She's very hungry. She's pregnant and about to give birth. And she actually says, and this is recorded in the Quran, that I wish I was dead, that I didn't have to go through this. Now, you can imagine there are two reasons why she's saying that. On the one hand, yes, she's hungry, and the baby inside her needs nourishment. She needs nourishment. And this is obviously a desert. And also she's got the pain of labor. She's in enormous pain because of the baby. Every mother knows, and we as fathers, you and me, we know the pain that that mothers go through, that our wives have gone through in order to, produce children. So she's got that pain as well. And on top of that, she has to explain this baby. She's a virgin. She has never slept with anyone. She has never committed any haram. But how does she explain the baby? So she's saying, what a really difficult situation I'm in here. Anyway, baby is born, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells her, look, Maryam, I know the difficult situation you're in, but you know what? Just don't say anything for 3 days, right? Just don't say anything. Fast from speaking is the actual words in the Quran. After all, I mean, you can understand why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells this to her. What was she going to say? Well, this handsome young man just appeared in my room and he told me I was going to have a baby, and he leaves and I got pregnant. And, wallahi, he never touched me. No one has ever touched me, but I got pregnant. I mean, who is going to believe her? Would you believe her? Would I believe her? You can imagine the very, very difficult situation of the people. And her difficult situation is she knows she's done nothing wrong, but she can't explain it. And the people can only come to one conclusion, that she has committed haram. So when she comes, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells her basically, let the baby do the talking. You don't say anything. All right. Nothing you say is going to make any difference. As she appears to her, the word gets around, Maryam is coming to the village, and the villagers, the people are there ready to receive her. The rabbis, remember she's Bani Israel, so the rabbis are there, her family and villagers. And the Quran records the enormous amount of insult that they throw at her. How could you do this to your own family? You come from a highly respectable family. How could you do this to them? You destroy their reputation. You destroy your own reputation, and the reputation of the entire village you have destroyed by committing this haram. And the word baghiya is used by them like a loose woman or a prostitute. You behave like that. Your mother wasn't an adulteress. The Quran actually relates that. Look, your mother wasn't an adulteress. You sister of Aaron, Harun, who must have been maybe Harun al-Islam, the prophet, or some other Harun. But essentially, you could understand their anger. And Maryam is just standing there, speechless. And then the Quran says, فَأَشَارَتْ إِلَيْهِ, she points to the child, and the rabbis and others say, what? We're asking you the questions, you're pointing to the child. But then the baby, I think, was actually taking milk from his mother, turns his head towards the people and says, Inni Abdullah atani al-kitaba waj'alani nabiyya. And other things, exonerating his mother, that she's pure, she's done nothing wrong, and he's there to defend her as well, etc.
He declared that Allah has actually, he was begotten the way miraculously, and that he is made as a prophet when he was very.
Yes, Inni Abdullah, indeed I am a slave of Allah. Atani al-kitaba, he has given me a book. Waja'alani nabiyya, and he has made me a prophet. So the people, they're looking at the rabbis and saying, what the hell's going on here? This little baby saying all this stuff. Maybe a week old, maybe a few days old. Baby, you obviously no baby could speak like that. And the rabbis are saying, don't look at us. We don't know what's going on. It's outside of our experience. There's nothing in our books in the Torah which tells us about anything like this. And so they're totally speechless. They know this is beyond their comprehension. So anyway, they stop their harassment of her, and they let her bring up Isa alayhi salam. Now, at this stage, let's just take a brief pause before we continue. The question that you could ask is, well, why was Maryam alayhi salam chosen for this miraculous birth, which the Christians refer to as either virgin birth or immaculate conception? Yeah, this fatherless birth. Why Maryam? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that she was the most pious, the most salihah, the most godly woman on the planet at the time, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose her. There's no one more closer to Allah amongst the women than she was. So that testifies to her purity. Then Ibn Kathir poses a question, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose this method? Why not just a normal birth? Why this method of, a birth without a father? And he proposes, Ibn Kathir, that, well, perhaps it's because there are 4 methods of conception. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showing his majesty and his power, that nothing is beyond him. There are 4 ways of creation. One is from nothing, like Adam alayhi salam was created neither with a mother or a father. So that's one. Then from a man only. Well, Adam alayhi salam, from Adam alayhi salam, Hawa was created. So that's from a man only. And then you and me and everybody else from a man and a woman. And then the 4th is from a woman only. And that is why Ibn Kathir proposes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there was one method that he had not basically shown humanity, that this is also a method of creation for Allah, and that is from a woman only. And that is why Isa alayhi salam was created only from a woman and with no male intervention. Okay. When the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ were told about this, they said, of course, we believe that this is, of course, Allah can do anything. But how is it? They said, look, it's outside of our experience, O Prophet of Allah. They wanted some kind of explanation. Yeah, we hear and we obey, but we would like a bit of an explanation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals a verse of the Quran in which he says, Inna mathala Isa inda Allahi ka mathali Adam. خلقه من تراب ثم له كن فيكون. ثم قال له كن فيكون. That the likeness of Jesus is that of Adam. He created him out of dust and said, be, and he was. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here is, why make the comparison with Adam? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that if you have no problem believing I can create Adam without a mother or a father, out of dust only, no mother, no father, you have no problem believing that, then surely it is less fantastic to create someone simply without a father. At least he has a mother. So that it should not be really much of an issue for you to believe that I can create someone without a father. And so, so this is all in the Quran. Let's move on. Now, as he's growing up, of course, as with any prophet of Allah, once you start saying, I have been sent by Allah, I am a prophet of Allah, what is the most obvious thing that people around you are going to say? Oh, so you're from God, you're a prophet? Come on, do something amazing to prove it.
Miracle.
And this is where the emojis are coming in. This is where the miracles which are gifted to prophets to prove that they are prophets, not for any other reason, to prove that they are prophets of Allah. There is the other side, which is another type of miracle, which is called karama. And that is gifted to individuals, non-prophets, who by virtue of their religiosity, how close they are to Allah, Allah grants them certain miracles, which many times they don't even know they have. Their followers, or those around them, they can see the miracle happening, but they may not even be conscious of it. And this is called karama. For example, food for 5 people may be sufficient for 20 people, 100 people. And it's not obvious why. It just happens. And Allah put so much barakah in that, and this is your karama. Anyhow, back to the story. So They said, look, do something amazing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him certain miracles. Now here, if we just stop a moment, so far as Christians are concerned, they accept pretty much everything that is the Quran says, apart from the fact that he spoke as a baby. Yeah? Apart from that fact, everything else, Muslims and Christians both believe in, that he was born without a father, etc. The next bit also, the Bible and the Quran testify to, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted Isa alayhi salam certain miracles. So, for example, he was able to make, if he made a bird out of clay, he would blow on it, and bi'idhnillah, by the permission of Allah, it would become a bird and fly away. If a blind person came to him, he was able to give him sight. Someone with leprosy came to him, he was able to cure his leprosy. And the ultimate of healing, of course, is that of healing death itself. So giving life to those who have died. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this ability. Now you might ask why this particular type of ability. And then this is, as I said, in the Quran and the Bible. Well, it is the, if you like, the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he does this with prophets. So whatever is the in thing within society, the prophet is given a gift that beats everybody. So, for example, at the time of Musa alayhi salam, the in thing was magic. Everybody was into it. And of course, Pharaoh had the best of magicians in the whole land. And we know the story in the Quran that the magicians, he takes on Musa alayhi salam because he says, I'm from Allah. So he said, okay, come on, take my magicians on. And the magicians there, they do their magic, then their illusions, and there are snakes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants him the staff. He throws the staff on the ground, and it becomes a massive snake, which gobbles up all the other snakes. And immediately the magicians realize that this is no magic. This is real. And this man really is from Allah. And they repent and they become Muslims. So at the time of Isa alayhi salam, the in thing was healing. Everyone was trying to find ways of healing. And so Isa alayhi salam was given the ultimate in healing, healing the blind, the leper, and of course, death itself. And just as a side note, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the in thing was poetry. Everybody was talking in poetry. You and I would be talking in poetry, as the educated classes, and that was it. People were just conversing, and the best of the poets, they were highly, highly regarded. And then along comes the Quran, and it is the most poetic of verse. Of course, it's the Kitabullah, but the verses are written in a way that the top poets realized this is not of human origin. Can't be. It's just too beautiful and too perfect in terms of poetic verse. And we could maybe talk about that at some other time.
Mm-hmm.
Many people just accepted Islam because they immediately recognized these words. Never mind the contents. Contents is a separate issue. Just the quality of the Arabic and the verse is such that it cannot be of human origin, because the best of the best could not even match a single verse. They couldn't add or take away a single verse from any chapter, even the shortest of chapters. Inna atayna kal kawthar. They couldn't add a word, they couldn't subtract it, in order to maintain. It's so perfect in its right. Anyhow, coming back to the life of Isa alayhi salam. So, yes, he was able to perform all these miracles. And then as he's growing up, now think about the knowledge of Isa alayhi salam, the incredible knowledge. On the one hand, his mother is educating him. And where did his mother get her knowledge? From Zakaria alayhi salam, who got it directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself through wahi, revelation. So his mother is feeding him with the most purest and the highest of knowledge of the Torah and whatever message from Allah. On the other hand, he is a prophet of Allah and he's getting revelation directly from Allah as well. So you can imagine the level of knowledge Isa alayhi salam had. Immense knowledge. Anyhow, now he sees the rabbis abusing the Torah and for their own personal gain. And he starts to tell them that what you're doing is wrong. You're twisting the words of Allah for personal gain. Don't do this. They quickly realize that this guy is going to undermine our authority. He's going to weaken our authority. We need to get rid of this guy because they realized he was telling the truth, but that truth was not in their interest. So they tell the Romans, who will rule the area, that this guy doesn't accept your authority. So the Romans ask Isa alayhi salam, and he says, yes, I accept the authority of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, because of the rabbis, the Jewish rabbis, they decide, okay, well, this guy's got to be put to death, because otherwise he's going to create a rebellion against the Roman rule of Palestine. Anyhow, this is now, till now, Muslims and Christians are in agreement. Now, what happens next? There's a disagreement. The Quran, of course, was revealed to correct what had been distorted within the Injil and the Torah. It was the upgrade of Allah's message, because the previous messages had been tampered with, distorted, contaminated. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, according to the Bible, well, the Jews handed over Jesus to the Romans, who then put him on the cross. Jesus died, and after 3 days, his resurrection took place. And then he was raised up alive. What the Quran tells us is to correct this. It says, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. That they neither killed him nor crucified him, but they thought they had. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرَفَعَ عَلَيْهِ, and I raised him up alive. So the difference is, well, we both agree that he went up alive. The difference is, Christians say he died first and then he was taken up alive by Allah. Islam tells us that is not what happened. He did not die. He was raised up alive by Allah. Here is where we both agree that near the end of time, Akhir Zaman, Isa alayhi salam will return. Both of us believe this. And this is very, very important for us to know what the Christian perspective is. I'll tell you what the Muslim perspective is and the Christian. But the Christian perspective gives us a very strong indicator as to why Gaza has been destroyed, why the West, especially America, is allowing this genocide to go ahead. It's because of what I'm going to tell you now. So what is the Muslim perspective when Isa alayhi salam returns? Well, as soon as he returns, he will kill the Dajjal. The Dajjal will have been in 50 days, and he will kill the Dajjal. And then he will get married, he will have children, he will rule the world from Masjid al-Aqsa. And some amazing stuff is going to happen. He will rule for 40 years. During those 40 years, really something amazing will happen in the world. The earth will be the deserts will become green again. And we actually can see signs of that happening now. We don't have to wait, hundreds of years. That is actually miraculously happening now. Those who go to Saudi for Hajj and what have you, they can see where there was desert, now trees. Maybe because of climate change, there's a lot more rain occurring. And also technology is helping to reclaim the desert and making it green as well. So there'll be a huge, and there'll be prosperity in the entire world. Because there'll be so much food. There'll be no one hungry. Also, the hadith of the Prophet tells us that the cross will be broken and the pig will be slaughtered. In other words, there'll be no more Christians or people of any other faith. Every human being will choose Islam as their faith. Every pair of lips will say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. And it's important to say Muhammadur Rasulullah. Why? Because you would think, some people may argue, well, why not Issa Rasulullah? And he will also rule in accordance with the Quran, not the Injil that he was given, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, not his own Sunnah. This is really important because when he returns, he will not return as a prophet of Allah. He will return as a member of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's really crucial to understand that. So what happens also, other amazing things will happen, apart from the world becoming green again, and a huge amount of prosperity. Everyone will be a Muslim. Hatred will disappear. There'll be no more hatred in the world. So the Prophet ﷺ tells us that a child will play with a python, with a huge poisonous snake will have, and it'll not fear that that snake will harm it. A child will have no hesitation putting its head inside the mouth of a lion because it will know that lion will not harm it. Even animals that eat other animals for food will stop eating them. Maybe Allah will make them herbivores rather than carnivores. So that's the level of peace. And of course, there'll be no more jihad. Jihad is, if everyone is a Muslim, why is there a need for jihad anymore? So there'll be no more jihad and therefore no more jizya. Anyhow, so these are the things that will occur. This is what the Prophet ﷺ has told us. And then, Isa al-Islam will die a normal death and he'll be buried. And soon after that, Yawmul Akhir will come, the day of judgment, the end of time will come soon after that. Now, that's the Muslim version, and that's what we believe, and we believe firmly that this is what's going to happen. Now, let's look at the Christian version. And this is very interesting because it tells us about the Christian mindset. You see, I'm just going to give you a little bit of history before I tell you what the Christians say is going to happen. Around 1860, indeed, I'd say even a little bit before that it started, but certainly around 1860, it started to pick up momentum. A movement was started by Protestant Christians. We call them Christian Zionists. Yeah. And this movement, this is a time when Britain's got its huge empire. France has its empire. Germany has its empire. The Dutch and the Christian West has its huge empire throughout the world. And they're saying to themselves, well, you and I, we've discussed end of times, and they've been, people have been discussing end of times for over 100 years, 200 years. And so the Christians were saying, what are the conditions for the end of time? Because we can see that, we seem to be heading in that direction. This is over 150 years ago. And so they looked at the Bible and they said, yeah, okay. They came up with, 4 things in particular need to be in place before God Almighty sends Jesus Christ. Okay? In other words, we're going to fulfill these conditions to force God to send Jesus, alayhi salam, right? This was their mental attitude.
And setting up the agenda on God, yeah?
Yeah. Force him to send Jesus. So what are the conditions? Number 1, Israel must exist. Well, there was Palestine, which is under the Ottomans. So Israel had to exist. Number 2, that all Jews must go to Israel. Well, that's what's been happening over the last 100 or so years. They've been encouraging that. Number 3, Jerusalem must become the capital of Israel. Well, Trump did that a few years ago. And 4, Al-Aqsa must be destroyed, and Jerusalem and Solomon's temple must be built again. They're saying that where Al-Aqsa is today, there used to be a Solomon's temple, which the Romans destroyed in 70 AD. Okay? So now, up to this point, both Jewish Zionists, who created Israel, and Christian Zionists, who helped the creation of Israel, they both are in agreement. They both agree on all of these points. And that's why today, the Christian Zionists and Jewish Zionists are like that. They really are, on the same page. However, there is one thing that the Christian Zionists don't shout out too much about. And that is that when Jesus returns, every Jew will be expected to become a Christian. And those who don't will be slaughtered. Now, think about it. There are officially about 16 million Jews on this planet today. Now, Noam Chomsky, I'm sure you've heard of him, and many of our listeners will have heard of him. He's a very famous American Jewish intellectual, the father of linguistics, as they call him. And in one YouTube video that I was watching, he's being interviewed and asked his exact question about the Christian Zionist belief. And he said, yes, it's there very clearly that 160,000 Jews will become Christians and they'll be saved, but the rest will be slaughtered. Now, bearing in mind, there's officially 16 million, 160,000 is 1%. So according to the Christian Zionists, 1% of Jews will be saved because they'll accept Jesus as Lord. But the 99% will be slaughtered. So they have been planning this mass slaughter, mega Holocaust of the Jews from 150 years ago.
But the question is, what happened to the Muslims?
Oh, and anyone who also, even amongst the Muslims and anybody else, they'll all be slaughtered. But they've been planning this because remember, the idea is to make sure that every Jew in the world comes to Israel so they can slaughter a lot of them. Okay, that's been the plan. And you'll find that Christian Zionist churches and individuals, your camera's gone off. Christian Zionist churches have been financing Jews from around the world to come to Israel. For this purpose, they've been literally financing millions and millions of dollars. Anyway, So when Netanyahu has been asked about this, that you're getting very close to these Christian Zionists. And by the way, and this is important to know, who are these Christian Zionists? Southern Baptists are Christian Zionists. All conservative Christians are Christian Zionists. Evangelical Christians are Christian Zionists. Tele-evangelists are Christian Zionists, and others as well. So you've got about maybe 60 to 80 million Christian Zionists in America alone. And indeed, you've heard, we've talked about, we'll talk about the Balfour Declaration. Alfred Balfour, or Lord Balfour as they call him, was a Christian Zionist who signed the Balfour Declaration. Okay. So so in other words, oh, one more thing. Every single American president has been a Christian Zionist. Yeah? Every single Christian Zionist, US president has been a Christian Zionist. Just let me put this on pause. Right. Okay. So what's the situation? So Biden, yeah, who and every single US president has been completely pro-Israel. Yes, they are pro-Israel. However, don't think for a moment they like the Jews. No, the Christian will never forgive the Jew for killing his God. That's why the Christians have been persecuting Jews for centuries in Europe, for this reason. And so there is no question that the Christian Zionists, yes, they love Israel and they will protect Israel always, and they will pour billions of dollars for Israel to exist, the latest killer weapons for it to defend itself, but they absolutely detest the Jews, as I said, because they will never forgive the Jews for killing their God. Because remember, according to the Bible, they are guilty of murdering Jesus. According to the Quran, as I've already mentioned, they are guilty of attempted murder, not murder.
Mm.
So that's the reason why Christian Zionists hate the Jews, but they love Israel and they will always protect Israel. When Netanyahu has been asked about this, and rabbis have been asked, you're very close to these Christian Zionists, but this is what they're planning. And their answer is, well, so long as they are giving us all these billions and billions, they can hate us as much as they like. When Jesus comes, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. In other words, they believe this about Jesus coming back and then them slaughtering us, but we don't believe this because, of course, the Jews don't believe that he was a Messiah. Okay, he was a Messiah, and Muslims we do. Isa al-Islam, we believe, was the Messiah. So they know this. They know that what I'm saying to you, they are totally aware of this. But they say, yep, this is their belief. But, we don't care how much they hate us. And this is generally the attitude that the Zionist Jews have towards the Zionist Christians. That they can hate us, they can be as anti-Semitic as they like, so long as they are pro-Israel. And Trump, if you listen to his speech to AIPAC, the most powerful pro-Israel lobby in America, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, Trump is scathing and contemptuous towards the Jews in their own conference when he was president, basically seeing them as the other. I know your sympathy isn't with this country; it's with Israel. That's the kind of, he and what they call Jewish tropes. So he never even hid his anti-Semitism. And Christian Zionists don't hide their anti-Semitism.
Which why is it because now they passed the law now when they equate anti-Semitism with the anti-Zionism?
Well, that obviously is a problem for the Christian Zionists as well, not just for Muslims, because as I said, they are openly anti-Semitic, the Christian Zionists, but the Jewish Zionists say, look, we don't care how anti-Semitic you are, so long as you're pro-Israel, you're pouring these billions and billions of dollars into Israel for its security, for new settlements, etc. You can continue being anti-Semitic. That's their attitude. So there we are. That's the situation regarding now, and that's why Gaza, and we can go on to Gaza now, is being the mass slaughter is going on. Anyone who is an enemy of Israel is automatically an enemy of not just the Jewish Zionists, but the Christian Zionists as well. And the Christian Zionists are even more anti-Arab and anti-Muslim than the Jewish Zionists.
Therefore, there's an alliance between them against the Muslims.
Total, complete alliance. Total, complete alliance.
And therefore, it's not politics. It has a religious actually background.
But here's the funny thing. Here's the interesting thing. And now we can we perhaps have a bit of time to talk about how, very briefly, how Israel actually came about, because this element it's not just the religious element. There are other factors as well. So should we go on to the creation of Israel?
Yeah, well, the case, I think we can just link up with that, because people should have a background on this, or they can find a lot of things on the internet and everything. But give us a brief history of this.
What I'm saying to you, you have to dig deep. You have to really dig deep to understand.
The war, yes.
Right. Again, we go back to around the 1860s. I've told you about Christian Zionism,
Yeah.
but there was another Zionist movement called the Jewish Zionist movement, right? The Christian Zionists were, you could call them Christian extremists almost, yeah? Christian extremists, Christian fundamentalists. However, the Jewish Zionists were like Theodor Herzl. Around the 17th, 18th century, especially 19th century as well, there was a lot of persecution of Jews in Christian Europe. And I've told you why. Because a Christian will never forgive the Jew for killing his God. And there's always been a suspicion about Jews within Europe by European Christians. So when this persecution really got pretty bad, this Austrian Jew, who was totally secular, liberal, white European, and atheist, okay, didn't care about religion or didn't believe in God, none of that. He looked at how much his people were being persecuted by the Christians and said, you know what? We need a place somewhere on this planet which we can call home, that we can escape from this Christian persecution and anti-Semitism. See, anti-Semitism is a European invention. To hate a Jew because he's a Jew. This is a European invention. Nothing to do with Islam. There's no concept of anti-Semitism within Islam. Never has been, and I hope there never will be. Because anti-Semitism literally means to hate a Jew because he or she is a Jew. Now, Islam makes it very clear to us that that would be a completely unacceptable position to take, because ultimately we are all the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, and therefore we are all brothers and sisters, whoever we are, whether we believe or we don't believe in Allah, whether we are Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, whoever we are as human beings, we are one family. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us very clearly that everyone is equal. There is no superiority or inferiority. Yes, the Jews believe themselves to be, the chosen people. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, yes, I do have a chosen people, but not by blood, not by race, not by color. لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة. أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون. Do you think that the people who are heading for the fire, for hell, are equal to those who are heading in the direction of heaven, Jannah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, no, the people who are heading in the direction of heaven are superior to those who are heading towards hell, towards the fire. In other words, God Almighty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that I don't care about the color of your skin. I don't care about your ethnicity, whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, whether whoever you are. I'm looking at your belief in Allah, your obedience to Allah, your love for Allah, your taqwa, your God consciousness, and your love for the creator of humanity, and your endeavor to try and obey him to the best of your ability. That's the only thing that distinguishes one human from another. So it is impossible for us to hate a Jew because he is a Jew. It goes completely against our mindset, against our thinking. But this was the thinking in Europe. These Jews, and they blame them collectively, are the killers of our God, and we will hate them until the day of judgment. So what happens? Theodor Herzl, this atheist, white European, secular liberal Jew, says we need a place somewhere on the earth. What they did, and then close to 1890, he writes a book called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, and he identifies about, I don't know, roughly 8 places in the world where this Jewish state could be. A piece of land which they can call home, where Jews will be safe. There's a piece of America. There's a piece of, they wanted a piece of Russia, Congo. Belgium was a power at the time over Congo, Argentina, Uganda, and Palestine. So Palestine was one option amongst many, okay, that they identified. And they identified these areas on the basis that either they were friendly countries or they were ruled by those who would be friendly towards the Jews. Now, because it's colonialism, so there'll be an occupied people. And hence, they don't have to worry about emptying out the land. The occupying force will empty the land out for them. I mean, that was the thinking, and that's why they chose these places. And it was only so this meeting in Basel, Switzerland, of the World Zionist Congress took place in 1897, and they basically, Theodor Herzl presented, and all to these Jewish intellectuals and Jewish, top financiers, and Rothschild, of course, was there, of the famous Rothschild banking dynasty, and a 50-year plan to create a Jewish state in one of those places was put forward. And I understand it. I mean, Theodor Herzl died in 1904, and Palestine was actually chosen after his death. So now, of course, it's Rothschild, who is Lord Rothschild, who is now the head of the Zionist movement. And this is, if you like, his project now. And of course, he is very, very prominent as a Jewish financier and, respected by the British. Now, and Chaim Weizmann, who was a chemist in this country, in Manchester, in Manchester University, was a chemist who later became the first president of Israel. He also, the British wanted because as a chemist, he came up with some explosives and stuff which the British wanted for their war efforts. And so that was one of the agreements as well. Well, fine, I'll give you your explosives, you give me Israel or Palestine. And so the British thought about it and thought, that'd be a good idea. When the idea was presented to the British, that maybe, they would give, once the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I and the British took over Palestine, and the mandate was given to them, then the Zionists, they approached Britain, Lord Balfour, and said, how about giving us Palestine? And I thought, you know what, now, let's just see what happens here. Remember, Palestine was under the Ottomans. After World War I, just before World War I, the British and the French, who had their empires, they had an agreement between them. If we can get rid of the Ottoman Empire from the Middle East, whatever lands in the Middle East are controlled by the Ottoman Empire, we'll cut them up and we'll divide them between us, the British and the French. And that's what they did, right? So Lebanon and Syria went to the French, and then Iraq and Egypt and Jordan as well went to the British. Yeah. Now, both of them were actually, British and the French wanted Palestine. And so they said, well, rather than fight over it, let's let the League of Nations, which came before the United Nations, let them deal with it. And now, of course, these are the major powers that are part of the League of Nations, mostly the major powers, the European powers. So the League of Nations said to Britain, okay, you can we'll give you the mandate for Britain. Now, I didn't even know. I've been hearing for decades, Britain had the mandate over Palestine. I never really understood what mandate was, and I'm almost sure that you probably wouldn't be able to explain to me what mandate is, and most people can't.
It's just administration.
Until I read somewhere what mandate actually, what was the mandate? The League of Nations said to Britain, you can administer, not ownership, you can administer Palestine until you can train up enough people, Palestinians, to run their own country. And then you pull out. That was the mandate. But when Britain got the mandate from the League of Nations, Britain thought, the Zionists, they approached Britain, how about giving us Palestine? And so the British thought, well, hang on, remember Christian Zionism? Well, Lord Balfour was a Christian Zionist. And there were a number of Christian Zionists within the British, establishment. And they thought, you know what? That's what we want. We want Palestine, and these guys are going to create Israel out of it, a Jewish state, which is exactly in line with our Christian Zionist plans anyway. So, yeah, we agree to that. Okay, we're going to give you Palestine and turn it into Israel. Secondly, they thought, these people are atheists. And they're European, they're white Europeans like us. And we can identify with them as well. And, we will use these people to keep an eye on the whole of the Middle East on our behalf. So like a satellite, yeah? So whatever is happening in the Middle East, these guys are going to keep us well informed. Like our spies in the Middle East, basically. And they will create a Western secular liberal European civilization, because they are like us. They don't care about God or Jesus or God or Moses or Torah, or they don't want to know about religion anyway. They're atheists. And so they will create a kind of, as Cecil Rhodes, the great empire builder for Queen Victoria, he writes in his book, yes, this will be an outpost of European civilization in the heart of the Middle East. That was the idea. So on the one hand, it would be a European country, because these people are European secular liberals. And it's a European civilization there. And they'll keep an eye on the whole of the Middle East. Is bang in the middle of Middle East, so they will keep an eye on it on our behalf. And at the same time, the Christian Zionists wanted the creation of Israel in Palestine. So everything came together. They said, yep, we are in favor of it. And therefore, the Balfour Declaration was signed in November of 1917, just after World War I finished. Now, Arthur Koestler, a Jewish academic who's respected by Jews even today, he was a historian, journalist, and academic. He writes that he sums up the Balfour Declaration, because that is where the problems of the Palestinians started, at that Balfour Declaration, 1917, not on October the 7th, 2 months ago. That's where the problem started for the Palestinians. Because Arthur Koestler says this is a document in which one nation has promised a second nation the country of a third nation. Britain has promised the Jews the country of the Palestinians. So what he's saying is, Britain couldn't promise the Jews the country of the Palestinians because Palestine didn't belong to Britain. Britain could promise Manchester to the Jews. They could promise Birmingham, London, maybe even Scotland to the Jews. Isle of Wight to the Jews, because they belonged to Britain. But it couldn't promise Palestine, because Palestine belongs to the Palestinians, not to Britain. In other words, what he's saying is this document isn't worth the paper it's written on. Anyhow, so what happens now that Britain is in control of Palestine completely, is its soldiers and administration, everything is in control of Britain. Britain has signed this agreement now with the World Zionist lobby, your Rothschilds and what have you, and so opens up the gates, the doors of Palestine to Jews from all over the world. And so they invite Jews. The Zionists go around the Middle East, wherever there are large Jewish communities in North Africa, Iraq, Syria, also, of course, in Europe, and says to them, come, this is your land. This is a place where we will be safe. And of course the people say, well, but there are people surely living there. No, this is a famous saying that they started. This is a land without a people for a people without a land. Yeah, they started to. Of course, there were over 1 million Palestinians already living there. And of course, as the early Jewish people started arriving, they realized, hang on, this is not some empty desert that we were told it was. There's people living here who are very much, they are cultivating land, they're living here, there's life here. This is not a desert. We were lied to by the Zionists. And so that's what happens. They start arriving and they see all this. And now here's the interesting thing. The Palestinian farmers who saw these small numbers of Jews coming in from around, well, end of the 19th century, early 20th century, they see them coming in, and they know that, they're told that these Jews are being persecuted in Europe, which they were. And so they were very, very nice to these, white European Jews who were coming in. And I've seen documentaries in which they actually showed, because the camera had been, the video was actually invented at the time, and they actually show these early Palestinian farmers taking such sympathy and so much hospitality towards these Jews that someone who had many acres of land would literally give free of charge a couple of acres to these new Jewish families who are coming in from Europe, the persecution of Europe, and said to them, you cultivate the land, it's yours. I mean, imagine the generosity of these Palestinians, just giving the land to these people who had been persecuted. Of course, they had no idea that these Jews, these Zionist Jews who were coming in from Europe and from other places, were coming in with a very clear agenda. And it wasn't to be refugees or to be migrants, as Britain and Europe is crying about now, about all these migrants coming over. It took a bit of time for the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people to understand that these are not just ordinary Jews coming in to live, to escape persecution. These people have come here to take over our land. And because in the initial stages, some of the Palestinians even sold some of their land to these new Jews who are coming, because they thought, okay, fine, they're giving us a good price and they're migrants. They couldn't see any harm in selling it. So about 4 or 5% of the land did get sold to these new migrants. They were coming with money and good money. And so, they thought, well, these guys are pretty generous with their money, and so we'll sell some land to them. As soon as they realized, and the Palestinian leadership realized that, oh my God, these people who are coming in, these are Jewish Zionists, and they've got this agreement with the British establishment to turn Palestine into Israel and to take over our country. As soon as they realized that, of course, there was no more selling any more land or giving any land to the Jews. But of course, the British, they were not going to tolerate this, because, they had an agreement with the Jews that we're going to allow you to basically take over this land. It was, and as they were coming in, they were setting up their kibbutzes, their farms, their communal farms. And the British, they were training up. Remember, they just finished World War I, and they still got their empire, so they've got a very, very highly trained army and commanders and generals and stuff. And so they were training up these Jews who were coming in military training, arming them, and they were protecting the kibbutzes from any Palestinian attacks. Of course, once the Palestinians realized, my God, these people have come to take over our land, they weren't going to be so hospitable towards them. And so, the British, they trained up the Jews. And in the meantime, the Palestinian resistance started to rise as they saw thousands of Jews from Europe, from the Middle East, North Africa coming in, and they thought, oh my God, 1 million people. It was, and especially the numbers started really arriving in large numbers when Hitler came to power in 1933, and the persecution of Jews really accelerated in Europe. And so huge floods of Jews were coming into Palestine until around 1935, 36, about a third of Palestine became Jewish. About 300,000 Jews had arrived, and there were mass protests. And of course, what did the British do? Before this, they kicked out, expelled the Palestinian leadership outside of Palestine, so that the Palestinians would be left without any leadership. And the resistance, Palestinian resistance that had formed, the British stamped down on them, either jailed them, killed them, or expelled them. And in fact, again, we're talking about the late 1930s, 36, 37, 38, 39, the British brought in their top generals and commanders from World War I to completely disarm every single Palestinian in Palestine. So they were unable to form any form of resistance. And so they just stamped down very, very harshly on all Palestinian resistance, killed them or jailed them or expelled them. And in fact, if even one cartridge, never mind a bullet, if a cartridge of a bullet was found in someone's house, the whole house was blown up. And indeed, whole areas were blown up if there was any sign of resistance or arms found anywhere. This is to complete, and so, you know, where we see the collective punishment in Gaza, well, where did these Zionist Jews learn this collective punishment? It was from the British. They taught them because the British trained Jewish militias. They trained them. And so that's, and then in the meantime, especially closer to the mid 40s now, 1944, 45, the British have now trained up a huge number of Zionist Jews in military training, armed them heavily with the latest weapons in order to help them basically they started to clear out Palestine. One from Jaffa, Haifa, and then even while the British were there, they just turned a blind eye. These Jewish terrorist groups, the Haganah, the Irgun, Sterngang, and Palmach. These are four well-known Jewish Zionist terrorist groups that the British basically had created and trained up and armed, and they basically formed. They started as more and more of them came, and the intellectuals came, and the others, and your David Ben Gurions and others, and then you have your Menachem Begins and Yitzhak Shamir's. These were the leaders of these terrorist groups, and they were working, of course, with the British until the British, when there were massive protests in the mid 40s, when Palestinian people realized, we're about to lose our country here, because these British have just opened the gates, and these hundreds of thousands of Jews are just pouring in, and we're going to be a minority in our own country very soon. Imagine, Britain is moaning about a few thousand refugees coming in. Yeah. Imagine 20 million, 22 million, 1/3 of the country, within a very, very short period, these 22 million refugees and migrants that come into this country. What do you think would happen? Even the most pro-refugee people, the most pro-migrant, British would say, okay, being nice to these migrants is one thing, but this is getting a bit too far here. Don't you think so? So that's what happened. And the people rose up. And of course, they had been disarmed. They had no arms to fight with. Their leadership had been expelled. And so they were pretty much headless. But, they tried to organize themselves individually, small groups here or there in the villages that were being attacked. And then the British said, okay, fine, we're going to reduce the amount of immigration coming in. But then the Zionist terrorist groups like your Haganah and your Irgun and Sterngangs and Palmach, they said, you're not going to do that. Sorry, Britain. And they started killing British soldiers as well, and started destroying the famous King David Hotel in, I think, 1946, 47, thereabouts. They destroyed it with 93 administrators of British administrators of Palestine were killed. And then they thought, okay, well, job's done anyway. We were going to give these Jews Palestine. There's enough of them. We've trained them all up, given them all the training they need to establish their state. And they're starting to kill us now as well, our British soldiers. And of course, the Irgun were well known for this. And they started, they're putting bombs on buses that were used by Palestinian mothers taking their children to school. They were blown up. So a lot of terrorism was taking place. And so the British said, you know what? I think in 1947, 48, they said, yep, it's time for us to go. Job's done. No need to have our British soldiers killed as well now, because these people are not happy that we're putting restrictions. And they left, and then they gave the mandate back to, now, of course, the League of Nations had become the United Nations, which are, again, mostly the Western European powers. The rest of the countries, of course, had not joined. This is the early days of the United Nations. It was the Western powers, America, Britain, France, Russia, etc., who were part of the United Nations. And they gave the mandate back to the United Nations and said, okay, you deal with it. In the meantime, as soon as the British gave back the mandate and left, David Ben-Gurion and the rest of the Zionists, they declared their state of Israel. This was 1947. Yeah? Or was it 48?
48, yes, United Nations.
And then they came to the conclusion that, we've got a lot more Jews to come in here. It's a small piece of land. Two of us can't live in the same land. So the only thing is, kick all the Palestinians out.
That's a Nakba, yeah?
And that was your Nakba. Yeah?
Yes.
Kick them all out so that we can make room for all the other Jews from the Middle East, from North Africa, from Europe to come and live here. And so by sheer terrorism, they started slaughtering the populations and terrorizing them. A number of massacres, the most famous ones like Deir Yassin, took place, where, again, people didn't have arms to defend themselves with. The British had taken all their arms away, their weapons and stuff. But people, managed to find some way of trying to defend their villages and their farms. But of course, they were hugely outnumbered and outgunned by the Zionist terrorist groups. And they were, from the north, they were expelled into Lebanon, in Syria, and the east, they were shoved into the West Bank as it is now, and also Jordan. 70% of Jordan today is Palestinian. And in the south, into Egypt, into refugee camps. And also into Gaza. 70% of Gazans are refugees from 1948. They are refugees from other parts of Palestine. And also Ashkelon and Sderot and what have you, local towns. They were forced out of that and made way, of course, for the Jews. And so they went round and basically emptied out, destroyed, blew up, their homes, all the institutions. So there was nothing left. No means of resistance was left for the Palestinians to be able to hang on to their land. Your camera's switched off.
All right, so 1 minute, because I think we might have to have a break now, because my yes.
Okay, should we take a pause?
Yeah, I think we have to take a pause. Save it, yeah.
Now. Okay, we're back after a short pause. Now, what happens, of course, is that, as I said, the Zionist groups, the terrorist groups, the Haganah, the Irgun, the Sterngang, the Palmach, they start slaughtering, terrorizing the Palestinian population. And the leadership under David Ben-Gurion, by the way, who himself was a hardcore atheist, as well as all the other Zionist leaders. These are white European, secular, liberal atheists, a lot of them. Okay, so this idea of promised land and stuff is far from their thoughts. So they come to the conclusion, okay, we can handle about 20% Palestinian population, but 80% we have to get rid of them. Okay, and that's what they did. So they forced them out into the different lands until about 20%
About
was left.
750,000 of them.
So 800,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed, forced out from 700 villages.
All right.
Okay? That's the reality. 800,000 Palestinians were forced out or massacred.
And do you think that this what they are doing now in Gaza is a repeat, isn't it?
So we'll come to that in a moment. So that and Deir Yassin, of course, is a famous massacre that a lot of people know about, but there were other massacres as well, where these terrorist groups, trying to remember which one it was either the Haganah or the Irgun, I think it was, one of them went in, and one particular case that was highlighted in this film, the documentary I was watching, in which they go to a baker's in Deir Yassin, this village, and they tell the baker, okay, your son, child, probably 2-3-year-old, throw him into the oven. And he says, no way, I'm not going to do that. You know, of course, they've got their guns and stuff. And so they take the child and they throw the child into this burning oven. Imagine that. Yeah. And then followed by that, they grab they kill or grab the actual baker and throw him into the oven to burn alive. And of course, they made sure that everybody knew the horrific stuff that they were doing in order to terrorize them. You know, we're coming your way as well. Look what we did in Deir Yassin, and babies and children, others, they threw them into wells as well, slaughtered and raped many of the women. And so they wanted to make it as horrific as possible so that, you know, people would go to other villages and say, you know, this is what's happening to us. And just by hearing about these massacres, many of them obviously would say, well, they had nothing to defend themselves with. They had no weapons or anything because the British had already taken their weapons off them. And so they started to escape for their lives, many of them. And others, their homes were blown up, so they had no choice but to leave. And so they were bombing and terrorizing whole areas and leaving one road open, which was either going up towards Lebanon and Syria, another road open, where they were slaughtering everybody else around, and just left one road open so they can go down towards Egypt, another road towards the West Bank and towards Jordan. And what they're basically doing now as well, you know, with the Rafah crossing and stuff. So the Palestinians have been through this before in 1948. And that's why, even though they are being slaughtered in Gaza, they know once they leave, there's no coming back. There's no coming back at all, because many of them left with the intention that we will come back once this war is over. Because that's what happens in wars. Generally, you know, they are they're forced out of areas, but then afterwards they return back to their homes. And so this is what the Palestinians thought as well. Many of them, they left because on the one hand, they had no means of defending themselves. And secondly, they thought, well, okay, fine, we'll leave, as the Zionists were telling them, you know, leave now and then, you know, hoping that later on they could come back once they'd wiped out any kind of resistance against them. But of course, once they had been forced out, there was no question of going back. And the whole idea, you know, of the law of return, it's okay for the Jews, even if you have no connection with Israel, you can so-called return back to your land. They had no connection with the land in the first place, so they weren't returning back, but they're given automatic citizenship when they come. But the Palestinians who've been living there for thousands of years, there's no question of them coming back to the homes from which they were expelled. So that's where we are. And of course, then I said, a fait accompli, as they say in French. The matter had been completed. And, well, what the Arab countries did, well, we can maybe discuss that afterwards. But that's basically what happened. That was Nakba number 1. And then we can discuss next time what happened from 1948 up till now.
Okay, I think that was great. Actually, we had a brief back in history anyway. I think it's very beneficial to our listeners and watchers as well. Of course, you can get more details on the internet and by reading books as well. You can read for yourselves as well the detail, because a lot of people don't know those facts and those dates and those personalities and the history of Palestine as well. And always, I said that Palestine lived for hundreds of centuries in harmony and peace, Jews, Christian, and Muslims and other faiths as well. They have no problem whatsoever until this world Zionism and the Zionist movement was made or created by European, and of course that is what we are seeing now, what is going now, and hopefully next week, inshallah, we will be focusing on 1948 up to now, and we hope, inshallah, we get part 2 for all our listeners. Thank you, brother Asad Zaman, for your brief and, of course, introduction about Jesus, because we are in December as well, and how the parents should be aware about what is taught in the schools during the collective worship and the actual morning assembly as well. And of course, the parents have the right to withdraw their children from collective worship and those assemblies if they want to, and they have a right to do so, but they have to make it in writing to the head teacher. Therefore, they can avoid confusing their children. Okay, جزاكم الله خير, and until we see you, inshallah, we say سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.